Today we're going to concentrate on mixing neutrals, not using them from a tube, but mixing them ourselves. So let's get started. We are going to be painting this little dog. Her name is Malin, and you can see that she's mostly gray. A little bit of black, but not much color. Not much color at all. So I thought this would be a good way to talk about neutrals. So take a look at this photo because we're also going to be editing this photo as well. All right, so now we're going to get started. Now, what I usually do is put in my darkest darks first. I have to have something to start comparing value to. I'm using a triad here. You can see on the far right where I put the triad dabs. It's ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, and burnt sienna. That's the triad I'm using for my darks. And sometimes I use this for black as well, or I'll add some indigo to it, which I am going to do later because in the end, these darks weren't dark enough. So what I'm doing is I'm establishing the underlying notan, N-O-T-A-N, of this painting, the underlying pattern of darks against white. And if I can do that, and if I can establish at this stage what the thing is, in other words, it's recognizable just based on the design of the underlying notan, then I have a pretty good shot of a good painting. So the darks are in. Now I'm putting in the lights. So lights on the dog would appear as looking like white. So again, I'm using a triad, and I used burnt sienna, again alizarin crimson and ultramarine blue, but watered it down a little bit. So again, I'm doing triad work. 3 colors combining on the paper. I have those individual colors on the palette, but I combine them on the paper, and I know it doesn't look like this is going to be white because, but it will be because I'm going to work on that. You'll see. Unless I changed my mind later and made this a midtone, but I don't think I did. So my point is that at this point, I've got my underlying darks in using a triad, and I've got my underlying lights in using a triad, and I'm leaving the whites of the paper white. Drying everything, and you can see already that it's going to be a dog, so things are holding together pretty well. Now I haven't used any gray yet. This is what I want to use. I want to use gray as my midtone. So I take a lot of time here mixing up a gray. And what I'm doing with that value finder is I'm comparing, I'm sorry, it's jumping around so much. I'm comparing my grays. My goal here is to mix several grays from the colors I've already used. I'm going to mix grays, but they can't be as dark as the darks I already put in, and they can't be as light as the lights I put in. In other words, I took care of my darks, I took care of my lights, now I have to deal with midtones, and most of this dog is a midtone gray. But I can't use just one gray because that would make everything look very flat, so I use a variety of grays. And in order to mix those grays, I use complements. You know, I would have gone in and used blue and a little bit of orange, but not from the tube. I would have mixed my own orange, probably from alizarin crimson and a little bit of burnt sienna, always trying to stay consistent with colors I've already used, because colors will go really well together as long as they're mixed from each other. In other words, colors I've already used. And I've established from a very early time in this painting what was going to be my blue, which was ultramarine blue, what was going to be my red, alizarin crimson, and what was going to be my yellow, or my yellow substitute in this case, which was burnt sienna. So you can see the dog is taking on some gray. Now I drew a line there because on my value dabs, when the hairdryer goes away, you can see all the grays that I used. So the D indicates my darks, the L indicates my lights, the M indicates my mediums. There are a lot of medium grays put in. Now is where I felt like my darks weren't dark enough, and I'm sorry that the paper is jumping a little bit. I must have knocked it. It just takes one tiny motion to knock the easel, and then that moves the paper. And I decided my darks weren't dark enough, so I had to go back in. Now, in order to make a darker dark, I had to pull out some indigo, which I hadn't put in the painting yet. But I mixed it with some alizarin crimson and also with some ultramarine blue, which I had already used in the painting yet. So although it's a new color at this point, it's sort of modified by using colors that I've already used in the painting. So there are the basic value shapes of this little dog, Malin. Dry, 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 dry. I used a round brush and 140-pound cold press paper. Didn't feel like my mediums were established well enough, so I still had those piles, and I went back in and gave some things a second coat. That's not going to change the value at all. That value is still going to be a mid-tone. Every gray that I put in there is a mid-tone, but it sort of establishes those shapes a little better. Dry again. I don't remember. Oh, okay. She's wearing a little kerchief, which adds a little color to this very, very neutral looking dog. So I wanted to punch that up a little bit. But again, I used colors I've already used. I used alizarin crimson in there and also some burnt sienna. Now I had to deal with the editing part of this. You know, I thought about putting in the full background, which is a temptation when you're painting a pet. But oftentimes in pet portraits, people don't really want the stuff. They want the emphasis on the pet. And that makes sense. You know, it's a portrait just like any other portrait. So, you know, like of a person. So I looked at it and decided that I needed to edit out quite a bit that was in the background. But what I did here, which is important, and the real reason I wanted to make this video, is I really pushed color in the background. I pushed color because if you put a lot of color in the background and your overall thing that you're painting is a neutral, it will really pop that neutral. So if I had gone ahead and kept going into the gray areas, I don't think I would have liked this painting very much. So I really, really, really tried to push color because all the colors in the dog in Malin are quite tamped down because they're grays. So, you know, made a lot, and I had also created quite a bit of purplish kind of colors in the dog when I put in my light and my dark triad. So pulling out a yellow or an orange kind of makes sense because it's the complement. And so that's going to make things pop a little bit. You know, anytime you're mixing, and I didn't mix across the color wheel, but, you know, the theory is if violet is the opposite of, what is violet? Well, yeah, violet's the opposite of yellow. Then if I go toward yellowish things in this background, it's going to make this overall composition kind of pop. So that's what I did. But I wanted the photograph to be nearby so you could see that that was a decision made because you can get really lost in detail. You get really lost in detail and technique in watercolor. And I prefer not to if I don't have to, because I really think that for me, it takes away from the subject itself. And the subject in this case was the dog. You know, that primary thing you have to do at the beginning, and you know, you have to establish your darks, your lights, your mediums. I know all that, but even before you get to that, you kind of have to say to yourself, why am I painting this painting? Well, I'm painting this painting for somebody who loves this this delightful dog. And so she's not going to be interested in the couch and the plant and the floor and all that. So I have to de-emphasize that. At the same time, I have to push color because if I don't push color in the background, the overall painting is just going to read as being kind of well, dull. And then the last thing that I do is put some color spots of value in the dog. And those are some burnt sienna that I put in some spots on the dog because there's going to be some reflection from the floor up into the dog's face. I mean, I can't even say that I saw it in the photograph. And if you've watched any of my videos, you know that I'm not about matching the photograph to color. That's not what I do, but I do match value. I match value to the photograph. And you know, you can sort of get a feel for where there's a little bit of warmth, and if there was a little bit of warmth, then to tie it all together, to put a little bit of burnt sienna in there made a lot of sense. So remember to join my YouTube channel. Keep the whites of your paper white, your paints wet, mask for value, mix for color, and I will see you next time. Okay, bye bye.